August 1590. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, its waves catching the gold of the rising sun, whispering both promise and peril. The small fleet of English ships led by Governor John White sailed toward what would become one of the most enduring mysteries in colonial America, Roanoke Island. White's mission was not just exploration. It was the attempt to establish England's foothold in the New World before the Spanish could consolidate their power. On board, the settlers carried dreams, families, and a dangerous optimism. They were artisans, farmers, soldiers, and nobles, men and women who believed that this new land could offer wealth, safety, and opportunity. But as they approached the coast, the dense forests and the strange, unmapped rivers hinted that survival here would require more than courage. It would demand cunning, diplomacy, and perhaps a willingness to confront forces beyond human understanding. The native peoples of the region, primarily the Algonquian-speaking tribes, observed the newcomers with curiosity and suspicion. Alliances would be fragile, misunderstandings could be deadly, and as the English set foot on the island, the seeds of tension and mystery were already planted. The first weeks on Roanoke were filled with hope, labor, and tension. The settlers constructed crude shelters from timber, chopped from the dense forests that covered the island. The air was thick with the scent of pine and the salty tang of the ocean. Every sunrise brought a new challenge, hunting for food, planting crops, and keeping the fragile alliance with the native tribes intact. The English quickly realized that survival in this land was not guaranteed. Crops failed to thrive in unfamiliar soil, and food supplies from the ships were limited. Many settlers fell ill from new diseases they had never encountered before, and the threat of storms constantly hung over the tiny colony. Yet it was not only nature that tested them. Tensions with the local Algonquian tribes were delicate. Some villagers traded corn and furs willingly, while others watched the newcomers from a distance, wary of their intentions. A young settler, Thomas Harriot, kept meticulous notes on the language and culture of the natives, understanding that knowledge might be the colony's best weapon or its salvation. Amid the labor and the negotiation, whispers began to spread among the settlers. Strange footprints were found near the perimeter of the settlement, too large for any known animal, yet too human to ignore. At night, some claimed they heard faint singing from deep within the forests, voices that carried over the wind but vanished when approached. Governor White dismissed these as nerves fraying under stress, but the whispers only grew louder. By October, a small group of settlers had ventured further inland than anyone had before, exploring the rivers and inlets of the surrounding lands. When they returned, they spoke of abandoned villages where fires had once burned, but no one remained. Crops lay trampled, and the faint marks of hastily packed belongings suggested that people had fled or been taken. Governor White ordered scouts to follow the paths leading from these villages, hoping to make contact with the natives and perhaps discover the missing settlers. What they found instead was eerie silence. Occasionally, they glimpsed a figure disappearing between the trees. A flash of red cloth, a shadow too human to dismiss. As winter approached, the colony faced the harshest reality. Roanoke was not a safe place. Food ran low, sickness spread, and the settlers' morale began to crumble. John White, forced to return to England to gather supplies, left behind over 100 settlers, including his own family, with a promise to return within 3 years. But when he finally came back in 1590, the settlement was empty. Houses had been dismantled, fences torn down, and the only clue left behind was a single word carved into a post: Croatoan. The disappearance of the Roanoke settlers became one of the earliest and most enduring mysteries of the New World. Scholars, treasure hunters, and historians have since debated what happened. Were the settlers killed by hostile tribes? Did they attempt to move inland and perish from hunger or disease? Or did they assimilate with the native peoples, leaving only cryptic signs behind? Recent archaeological evidence suggests that some of the settlers may have indeed merged with local tribes, leaving traces of European ancestry in Native American communities centuries later. Yet no definitive proof exists. The forests of Roanoke still hide secrets, buried artifacts, abandoned tools, and the echoes of voices that may never be heard again. This story of ambition, mystery, and survival is not merely a tale of the past. It reflects the human drive to explore, to conquer, and to endure in the face of the unknown. Each lost settler represents a life caught between worlds, the old world they left behind and the new world that swallowed them. By the spring of 1587, tensions on Roanoke Island had reached a breaking point. Settlers, weary from the long months of hard labor and scarce food, began questioning John White's leadership. Rumors spread of secret meetings in the forests, whispers of dissent among the younger men who believed survival demanded more than loyalty. It demanded risk. Meanwhile, interactions with the native tribes grew increasingly complex. Some leaders, like Mateo of the Croatoan tribe, welcomed the settlers cautiously, offering guidance on hunting, fishing, and cultivation. Others, however, remained distant, wary of English intentions and frustrated by the newcomers' growing demand for land and resources. Cultural misunderstandings, amplified by language barriers, sometimes turned minor disagreements into near-violent encounters. One night, as settlers gathered around a fire near the eastern shore, a small group returned from scouting the inland rivers with tales that chilled the colony. They claimed to have seen strange effigies carved from wood and bone, figures with elongated faces, arms outstretched, and eyes that seemed to watch. Some believed it was a warning from the native tribes. Others feared it was a supernatural sign, a curse upon those who dared settle in this wild land. Thomas Harriot, always the observer, noted in his journal, "The island holds more than earth and timber. It carries stories older than our king, whispers of men who vanish like smoke and leave only mystery behind." As months passed, small groups of settlers who ventured beyond the main camp began to disappear. One by one, tools, personal belongings, and sometimes entire tents vanished without explanation. Night patrols reported hearing cries in the distance, sometimes in English, sometimes in languages no one recognized. The settlers debated what to do. Some argued for immediate evacuation, fearing that the island itself might be cursed. Others, desperate to prove the colony's legitimacy to the crown, insisted on staying. John White tried to maintain order, but the stress was evident in his letters and sketches, which detailed both the landscape and the growing unease among his people. Interestingly, Mateo and other Croatoan allies seemed unusually calm. They hinted at secrets buried deeper in the forest, knowledge of paths and hideouts unknown to the English. Some settlers whispered that the native leaders knew more about the disappearances than they were willing to reveal. In 1587, faced with dwindling supplies and the urgent need for reinforcements, John White returned to England. His departure was bittersweet. He left behind his daughter, Eleanor Dare, and the first English child born in the New World, Virginia Dare. He promised to return swiftly, but fate and circumstance delayed him. Back in England, White found himself entangled in political turmoil. England was on the brink of war with Spain, and resources for distant colonies were scarce. Every month that passed felt like an eternity for the settlers waiting on Roanoke. Ships were delayed by storms, threats of invasion, and bureaucratic inertia. Meanwhile, on Roanoke, the colony struggled to maintain order. Without White, factions formed. Some settlers advocated for integration with the native tribes. Others clung desperately to English customs. And somewhere in the forests, the mysterious disappearances continued. When White finally returned in 1590, the scene that met him was chilling. Roanoke was empty. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no trace of the settlers' daily life, except for a single word carved into a post: Croatoan. White and his men searched the surrounding islands and mainland for signs of life, but they found nothing conclusive. Some believed the settlers had assimilated with the Croatoan tribe. Others feared a massacre had occurred. Harsh weather, dwindling morale, and unknown dangers forced White to leave, and the ultimate fate of the colony remained a mystery. Archaeological studies in the 20th and 21st centuries have uncovered artifacts suggesting contact between English settlers and native tribes. Yet the question persists: did the colonists survive in secret, or were they consumed by the unforgiving wilderness? The story of Roanoke is more than a historical curiosity. It is a narrative that continues to fascinate scholars, storytellers, and adventurers. It is a tale of ambition colliding with nature, culture, and mystery. Each lost settler represents a bridge between worlds, a life lived in the shadow of uncertainty and courage. The word Croatoan, simple yet enigmatic, has become a symbol for the unknown. It reminds us that history is not just what is recorded in books. It is what is whispered in the wind, hidden beneath soil, and carried in the bloodlines of those who survived. From the vanished colony to the descendants who may still carry traces of English settlers, Roanoke remains a testament to human curiosity, resilience, and the eternal lure of the unknown. As the settlers struggled to adapt to the island's harsh conditions, a remarkable transformation began to occur. Those who remained learned to hunt with bows instead of relying solely on English muskets. They learned which roots and berries were edible, which rivers teemed with fish, and how to navigate the labyrinth of marshes without getting lost. They depended on the guidance of Manteo and other Croatoan leaders more than they had anticipated. Some settlers began to adopt native customs, wearing practical clothing suited to the environment, using native techniques for building shelters, and participating in rituals of respect for the land. It was not assimilation in the full sense, but a pragmatic merging of worlds. In turn, the Croatoan observed the settlers' European skills with fascination. Metal tools, glass beads, and knowledge of distant lands intrigued them. Trade of ideas became as crucial as trade of goods. Eleanor Dare, the first English child born on the island, grew up straddling two worlds. She spoke both English and Algonquian fluently, navigating between her father's people and the Croatoan with ease. Her unique perspective made her a bridge, a living symbol of a new culture that might have been forming in secret, away from English eyes. The forests of Roanoke held more than sustenance. They hid secrets, both natural and unnatural. Small groups of settlers who ventured too deep sometimes did not return. Some claimed they had glimpsed shapes that were not human, figures that moved too quickly, and sometimes whispered words no one could understand. Others reported strange lights flickering among the trees at night, sometimes hovering over abandoned huts or empty clearings. John White's letters, written during his time in England, hinted at his fear of the unknown. In one entry he mused, "The island is alive in ways our understanding cannot reach. Every tree, every river seems to guard a secret. I pray we return soon, yet the land itself seems unwilling to relinquish its story." Whether these phenomena were natural, misunderstood native practices, or the product of collective anxiety remains unknown. But for the settlers, fear was as real as hunger and sickness, shaping their decisions and strengthening the bonds with their Croatoan allies. Back in England, the colony's fate became entangled in a larger geopolitical game. Queen Elizabeth III's court debated the worth of investing in distant colonies, while Spain loomed as a rival superpower. Merchants and private investors pressured for profits. Explorers sought glory, and military advisors worried about the vulnerability of England's fledgling foothold in the Americas. White's attempts to return to Roanoke were repeatedly delayed. Storms destroyed ships, funds ran out, and political priorities shifted. Meanwhile, the English settlers, isolated from their homeland, faced the challenge of self-governance. Factions formed, some advocating full integration with the Croatoan, others clinging stubbornly to English law and customs. Disputes over land, hunting rights, and authority created tension, yet also forced creative solutions that might have allowed the colony to survive unnoticed. Some historians now speculate that these secret alliances with the Croatoan could have allowed the settlers to exist for decades, quietly adapting, learning, and blending cultures. If true, Roanoke was not a failure but a hidden success, a society that survived off the map, out of reach of European attention. As John White finally approached Roanoke in 1590, he found only silence. The empty houses, dismantled fences, and the solitary word Croatoan carved into a post became symbols of the unknown. He searched nearby islands, consulted with tribes, and followed every lead, yet nothing conclusive emerged. The forest itself seemed to reclaim the land. Nature was quick and relentless. Paths disappeared, wooden shelters rotted, and evidence of human life faded. In a way, the mystery of Roanoke became a metaphor. Even when humans arrive with plans, maps and tools, the environment, time, and human error can erase all traces. Artifacts uncovered centuries later, European-style tools, glass beads, and fragments of pottery, suggest that some settlers may have survived in harmony with native communities. DNA evidence hints that descendants of English settlers may have lived quietly among the Croatoan and neighboring tribes, yet the full story is likely lost, whispered only in the wind through the pines and the marshes. Roanoke's disappearance has inspired countless retellings, books, documentaries, and speculative theories ranging from assimilation to alien intervention. For the American audience, the colony represents more than a historical footnote. It embodies the tension between human ambition and the unpredictable power of the natural world. It reminds us that exploration carries both risk and wonder. The word Croatoan is more than a clue. It is a symbol of mystery, survival, and the enduring human spirit. Each attempt to unravel it is a bridge between past and present, a quest to understand lives that straddled two worlds, and a testament to the resilience and adaptability of humanity. In the forests of North Carolina, beneath the thick canopy and hidden marshes, echoes of Roanoke remain. If one listens closely, some claim they can hear faint whispers, voices of those who once lived, struggled, and adapted in the shadows, leaving behind only questions for future generations. By late 1588, the settlers who remained on Roanoke had begun forming secret alliances beyond the official channels. Some Englishmen, frustrated with John White's strict orders and the Crown's absence, approached the Croatoan with proposals of mutual benefit, trade, shelter, and even shared defense. One night, Eleanor Dare met with Monteo in the dense marshes, their voices barely audible over the chirping insects. "We can teach them to hunt differently, show them which rivers hide fish when the tide is high," Eleanor whispered. Monteo nodded, eyes reflecting the firelight from a distant settlement. "And in return, we share what we know of metal tools, ways to preserve food and protect families from enemies." It was a pact forged in shadows, unrecorded in any official ledger. Families that joined this alliance vanished from official records, their lives continuing in secret among the Croatoan. Over time, they adopted native customs, learned new skills, and blended traditions in a way that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. Not everyone agreed with the secret alliances. A faction of English settlers, led by a man named Richard Grenville, a cousin of the famous explorer, believed complete adherence to English law and loyalty to the crown was paramount. Suspicion grew between the factions, fueled by scarce food and the constant threat of disease. One evening, a fire broke out near the main camp. Whether it was an accident or sabotage, it destroyed several huts and food stores. Fingers were pointed at both sides, trust frayed, and whispers of betrayal circulated through the colony. Thomas Harriot recorded the tension. Men who once shared bread now glance at each other as if enemies. Every shadow a threat, every laugh a potential insult, the Croatoan observed quietly. They had seen the destructive potential of divided human hearts long before the English arrived. In time, the settlers who chose alliance over loyalty began to withdraw, taking with them not just families but knowledge, tools, seeds, and ideas that might have saved the others. Hidden trails and river passages became lifelines for those who sought to survive beyond the main settlement. Small groups traveled under cover of darkness, guided by Croatoan knowledge, navigating forests dense enough to obscure them from anyone searching from the coast. These paths were not merely for escape, they were a corridor to a new life. Along the rivers, settlers learned to fish using traps fashioned from reeds, construct elevated platforms to avoid flooding, and store food using primitive but effective preservation techniques taught by their native allies. Eleanor Dare herself became a leader among these groups, teaching both English and native children how to read the stars for navigation, recognize medicinal plants, and honor the land that sustained them. Her story, though absent from English records, was preserved orally for generations, forming a hidden legacy of survival. By the time John White returned in 1590, the visible settlement was gone. Yet those who had fled into secret alliances with the Croatoan had established a hidden community that would survive for decades. Over generations, English and Croatoan bloodlines intertwined, creating families whose stories existed only in whispers, songs, and oral traditions. Centuries later, historians and archaeologists began to uncover artifacts, pottery with English-style decoration, fragments of tools, and traces of small farms hidden along rivers and marshlands. DNA studies revealed that descendants of English settlers had indeed integrated into native communities, confirming suspicions that survival had been quietly achieved, far from colonial oversight. The legend of Roanoke is more than a historical mystery. It is a story of resilience, adaptation, and human ingenuity. It challenges the simplistic narratives of colonization, revealing that survival often depends on collaboration, respect for the environment, and the courage to blend worlds rather than dominate them. The single word Croatoan, carved into a post centuries ago, remains an enduring symbol of that hidden truth. It reminds us that history is not only what is recorded, but also what is preserved in memory, bloodlines, and the land itself. As modern visitors walk the forests and marshes of North Carolina, they might feel a subtle echo, a whisper of those who lived in secret, who built a life unseen, and who transformed adversity into survival. Roanoke is not just a colony that disappeared. It is a story that continues, woven into the fabric of the land, the people, and the imagination of those who dare to listen. Today, Roanoke Island is a place of tourism and study, but beneath the tourist paths and reconstructed villages lies the mystery of its original inhabitants. Scholars debate every artifact, every piece of evidence. Some insist the colony was destroyed. Others believe it survived hidden among the Croatoan. Yet beyond facts and theories, the island tells a human story, a story of courage, cultural blending, and the enduring quest to survive. Those who vanished did not simply disappear. They left lessons carved not only in wood, but in the enduring resilience of life. The wind through the pines carries their whispers still. And for those willing to hear, the story of Roanoke is far from over.